Let me introduce to the stage the Assembly member from the 80th Legislative District, the chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and spouse to a newly elected county supervisor, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher. Let's give her a round of applause. Welcome up.
Thank you.
First, so let's just start with a political question about what you make of this year's elections. Are there bright spots in California? Do you feel like that there were opportunities missed, or is this really strong and that Democrats should be excited and proud?
Well, in California, obviously, it's a little different than the rest of the nation, although not so different, I guess I shouldn't say we're a little different. We're just a little further ahead than the rest of the nation, I think is how I'd say it. I think the nation is coming along and seeing kind of some of the votes in southern states. We see a lot of changes that are pending. They're coming. It's coming, which is a good news. I think in California, you know, I would be lying if I didn't say we exceeded expectations. We are going to go as a Democrat. I can say that. We're going to go into the Assembly on Tuesday with either 60 or 61 Democrats, an all-time high since the 1800s. We are going to go into the Senate, I think, with 29 Democrats out of 40. So you're talking a super majority in both houses. Obviously, Democrats won up and down the ballot for seats. Board of Equalization in this region, which has never been held by a Democrat, even won by a guy who was a spousal abuser and got disbarred in 3 states. And so I think it was clear that people were just voting for the Democrats, which I think is kind of an interesting phenomenon that I don't anticipate will continue in California. I think people will have to prove themselves a little more, as they should. But I think this is definitely a reaction to Trump policies and things that just haven't gelled well with most of our constituents.
Yeah, I think that point about being ahead of the curve is interesting, right? That the demographic shift that California enjoys is one that is coming in other states like Texas, in there yet, maybe. What do you think that, I think one of the interesting things about large supermajorities that often gets missed is how it changes the caucus dynamics. Obviously, there's been a strong Democratic caucus in the Assembly for years, but without betraying caucus rules and appropriate privacy, can you sketch for our audience some of the dividing lines, maybe labor versus environmental versus ethnic caucuses? How do some of the factions break down?
So it's interesting because a lot of times when you read it in the media, you see a lot about, the mods, the moderates, and the progressives. And that's, I think, a real easy storyline. But something that I've always been very clear with my colleagues and with people who watch the Capitol is it's not that cut and dry. It's not like you can take any member who even self-describes as a moderate and say that they're moderate on every issue, right? You have some who are moderate on oil and gas issues because they represent areas that's the major employer. You have some that are more moderate on labor issues. You have some who are more moderate on social issues. And so it's not an even brush or, police reform. I mean, there's things that anybody in the caucus promotes that has people on one side or the other for the most part. One of the things that we have seen change, and I'm really excited because I represent the southernmost portion of the state. So basically, just a few feet from here, the convention center is the dividing line for my district. So everything south of the convention center and on the western portion, all the way to the border is my district. And so I have a largely Latino population. I have a population of mixed status households overwhelmingly, more than any other portion of the state. And so one of the things that I think has been heartening and kind of the change of things I've seen in Sacramento compared to when I was even growing up in San Diego is that you do have uniformity when it comes to immigration issues. For the most part in the Democratic caucus, you have some uniformity when it comes to issues dealing with our Latino population. And so you don't see kind of that divide that we used to see.
So immigration there's pretty uniform, maybe not uniform, well, I don't know, maybe, are there any immigration issues where there are some sort of subtle differences within the caucus?
I haven't seen any, and in fact, some of the most controversial legislation on immigration, SB 54, I think every Democrat ended up voting for that. You see Democrats supporting health care for all individuals on resolutions that kind of blast the Trump administration for their policies. You see not only every Democrat go up, but a number of Republicans, at least the ones who kept their seats this time, go up in support of those as well.
Yeah. What do you give us your thoughts on Governor-elect Newsom in terms of fiscal policy as a budget writer vis-a-vis Governor Brown? Obviously, Governor Brown was generally pretty fiscally temperate or conservative, but there are some looming challenges with the California revenue situation. What do you think he will be like as a governor to work with as you write the budget?
Well, I think obviously he has, first of all, I don't write the budget. So I'm the appropriations chair, so I get to see all the fiscal bills. But the governor, of course, writes the budget. We just adjust it.
Yeah.
But I would say that we anticipate he will continue some of Governor Brown's fiscal discipline, as he should. I think that, individually we all have our pet projects and the things we want to see as legislators, and it's easy to kind of sit in our silo and say, I want this, this person wants this, and those numbers go really high. I often joke about, the legislators who bring bills to my committee, and I look at them in a package at the end, and I always call the ones who have bills that exceed $1 billion, kind of, they're not too aggressive. They just want $1 billion in spending, and you can imagine if each legislator does that, what that accounts for. I think the governor elect is going to really focus, or he said he's going to focus or try to kind of get a foot in on tax changes, which we desperately need. I think that's a good thing. It's going to be tough. I don't know what that means. It's easy to say it's a good thing, I guess, for me, because I know in my mind what kind of taxes, what kind of changes we should have to our tax structure. We haven't heard yet what he's looking at. I think that's going to be tough, but I think that could add more security in kind of a streamlining of our revenues throughout bad times and good. I think he'll continue to put away money in the rainy day fund, which is essential. I think that was one of the best things that we've done, and will really guard us against some of the horrible cuts that we saw, a decade ago when budget times were bad. And I think he was a big city mayor that did big things, so we anticipate the same. I think one of the biggest issues, especially for people involved in healthcare, what I've seen, or my biggest frustration with Governor Brown, has been on childhood issues, basically childcare, children's health, all these issues. He's been okay, but he really is not touched by it, I think, in the same way a lot of the legislators would. So we'd have conversations about childhood poverty and healthcare and everything you can imagine, child care. And he would just kind of say, like, yeah, I don't know. And I think that Governor Newsom has come out strong from day one about tackling issues that have to do with children, which are expensive, but pay big in dividends.
Yeah. How is it wrong to think that San Diego has a lot of political capital right now in the legislature, given leadership in the Senate, given, your position? A lot of times people say that Northern California has an outsized amount of power. It seems like San Diego's doing pretty well in the legislature these days.
I think we're doing well. We have a lot of fantastic legislators. I get to serve with Dr. Shirley Weber. I get to serve with Todd Gloria, who's fabulous. And of course, our Senate Pro Tem, Tony Atkins, my Senator, Ben Wesso. So you have a lot of people who have years of experience, who really are unabashed and pressing forward on things, and of course having leadership is always a positive. And I think we have really strong relationships with the governor-elect as well, so I think we're going to see a lot of good things for San Diego. I think Orange County is everybody's new stepchild, so San Diego maybe can be a real child now. So as far as Democratic politics go, I think that's true, and as far as the future goes, so I'm hoping that we've kind of broken out of that idea that we're just some sleepy little not lazy military town at the bottom of the state that doesn't want to be LA and doesn't want to do big things. I think you see a more assertive delegation.
Is it okay if we cut that statement about Orange County being everybody's favorite stepchild, use that repeatedly in videos from here on out? I thought that was a great line.
Did that sound bad? I mean, but you know what I mean? It's like everybody's talking about Orange County, and it's going to be a while, right? We have all these new legislators who are Democrats. I think that's great. I know some people don't think that's great. But it's kind of like, oh, Orange County. And that's how I felt like San Diego was, 10 years ago. And so I think we're now kind of like have our own footing.
Yeah. How about dynamics between the Assembly and the Senate? Sometimes that's really where the division or contention can be.
Yeah, I think the leaders of both the Assembly and the Senate right now work really well together. They're both they're both behind the scenes leaders, which I think is kind of interesting and probably will be good with kind of a Hollywood governor, if you will, somebody who's going to be out there and I think be in front on things. I think it's great that we have leadership in both houses that aren't ego-driven at all, and so that's positive. I think that it's going to be an interesting dynamic. I've seen the change back and forth where one house will be considered more moderate than the other house, and I've been looking at who is elected, and I really think that idea of the Assembly being more moderate has now shifted over, and I think the Senate is actually going to be the more moderate house, which is a change, I think, than over the last few years, especially without, when Kevin De Leon was President Pro Tem of the Senate, it didn't matter what the House was. He kind of pushed his way through, and I don't think you have that kind of leadership anymore. I think it's more collaborative. So it'll be interesting what comes out of both houses, but I think we'll work well together. I don't think there's a lot of animosity between the houses. I think the change in term limits has helped people settle in. There are Assembly members who will never serve in the Senate, and that's okay. I'm one of them. I think that's a good thing. I'll serve my entire time in the Assembly. And so it just seems like people are settling into those roles more.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the change, the larger caucus, the caucus that continues to look more and more like the rest of California, will change the way the speaker leads on issues? You mentioned that maybe now the Assembly will be more progressive than the Senate. Is there a shift maybe as a result of the change in the caucus with the Assembly's leadership?
Well, I think this Assembly, the speaker is a really strong, one of the most progressive people I've ever seen. So I don't think that he will change. I think that, he will, as always, kind of take the temperature of the caucus and move it in the direction. And if this has to do with healthcare in particular, which I know we're always wondering what's going to happen with, I think that that's a broader discussion. And again, one that doesn't fall along clear ideological lines about where people come out. I think that there's a driving need and a driving desire among our constituents to do something big and bold on healthcare. There's also a reality, at least in our house, and there's been multiple discussions about what we could or couldn't do. And we continue to have that discussion with the realities that we have a federal government that isn't, the SB 562s of the world was the number, right? The healthcare for all won't be the healthcare for all as some of the advocates would want. It's going to have to come in different forms. So
sketch for us where you think, on the one hand, you're not the chair of the healthcare committee, but all of the meaningful healthcare legislation ends up rolling through your committee if it has a price tag on it, which it almost always does. Maybe sketch for us what you think that conversation will look like related to single payer in the Assembly. I think a lot of folks that come to state reform, that read our stuff that we hear from, think that they would sort of say that there seems to be a very strong political demand to do something, as you said, and that, as you said, it won't be the simple answer. It'll be much more nuanced, and it might not be a single payer. It might be a consolidated purchasing, might be more advancements in Medi-Cal, could be a range of things. Maybe sketch for us where you think the conversation is headed there, on the Assembly side at least.
So if I had a guess, and this is a guess, don't hold me to it, because anything can happen. But I would guess that a lot of the direction is going to be led by the governor's budget. And because healthcare is such a big ticket item, I think we'll be looking at the January budget and the May revise to see exactly what he's putting in, what he's putting in for, what direction he's going with that. Because obviously, I think it's one of his priorities to expand healthcare, and he's talked about a number of things. And so I think that there will be a desire, especially in his first year, if he tackles some of this, to allow him to lead. And if you have competing ideas that are coming legislatively, at least through committees that have to be respectful of what is or isn't in the budget, that's going to be a consideration. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make any sense if he's spending $1 billion on healthcare in the budget to just to please people to pass a bill that goes in a different direction and costs, $4 billion. So I think there's going to be, I think at least this first year, I don't want to say we're not going to acquiesce to him, but we want to see the direction he goes. He's talked about it. He's supposed to be the leader. He got a lot of his support based on the fact that he was going to do for California what he did for San Francisco. So we got to see what that looks like.
Yeah. Any concerns? I mean, on the one hand, I feel like we have a unstoppable force, sort of an immovable object of the Trump administration, like that's very unlikely to approve a waiver of much significance, at least I will say.
I agree.
And then you have this sort of momentum of at least the primary campaign, where single payer or healthcare, but the idea of a single payer was a differentiator between Villaraigosa and Newsom, and ultimately I think was the catalyst of Villaraigosa's demise. And then that sort of disappeared from the general election conversation. So are we likely, I recognize we have to wait to see what the budget looks like, but are we likely to see a lot of action this year, or are we going to wait to have task forces sort of develop studies and look to maybe some action that might come in a 2021 new federal administration?
I actually think that the governor is going to have to act on healthcare this year. I think the pressure is too high, and I think if he doesn't, that you'll get a number of legislative proposals that go in different directions. And so I think in order for him to maintain control over the conversation and to be out front on it, he's going to have to act this year, at least with intent language or with program changes, even if it's just a public option, but something that moves us in a direction towards universal coverage. We've talked a lot, and we're hopeful about expanding, of course, coverage to folks regardless of their documentation status, things that could get us in trouble with the federal government, but things that we think are important in California, and we think that he will start to at least chip away. If you look at California's uninsured, a large portion of them now are uninsurable, and so it's not just doing something to provide health care, but really figuring out how do we ensure those who undercovered California and the federal rules now can't be part of a pool. I think also one of the things I've learned in my district and walking door to door in a lot of districts is those of us who deal with healthcare policy know the difference between single payer, a public option, Medicare for all, or maybe we don't, but I think we kind of do. The general public doesn't. The general public just knows that they want health care for everybody, and they want it to be affordable, and they want universal coverage. So I think sometimes the discussions we're having, we think are that the electorate basically knows what we're discussing, but I think when you dive into it, they're going to want to see something done that ensures broader coverage, less expensive coverage, and to ensure that we in fact are insuring as many people as possible.
You know, obviously, you and I just met, but I love your enthusiasm. This is great. I appreciate it. And I appreciate that from people regardless of their political persuasion. So kudos.
So is that like you don't agree with my political persuasion? He's about to be like, she's spunky and articulate, but no, wrong. That's okay.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
I'm cool with that.
I think that we need policymakers, regardless of their political stripe, that care enough to dig in, and you clearly do, and I appreciate that.
And when it comes to healthcare, and I often tell the story, so I think it's important for people to understand, for somebody like me, how important healthcare coverage is and why it matters. I was raised by a single working mom who had I had two older brothers, I had cousins living with us, I had grandparents living with us. She worked hard. She was a nurse, and she worked anywhere between 40 and 60 hours a week. Obviously, I don't think she ever worked 40 hours a week. She worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, and we were in a working class community. And when people said, like, how did you make it out, or how did you do so well, you and your brothers, one of the things I point to is the fact that we had healthcare coverage. And people don't really understand that even in working class communities and poor communities, if you have healthcare coverage, it changes your life. And I'll give you a few really concrete examples that happened in my life. We swam a lot. The beach was actually, we were in Oceanside, and the beach was kind of our daycare, if you will. My mom would be like, go under lifeguard station 11, I'll be there after work. Poor lifeguards, free childcare. But we swam a lot. I ended up with ear infections a lot. But because I had health insurance, I could go to the doctor. It could be treated. I didn't lose my hearing. I didn't end up, with massive infections. We actually treated it. When I was in 9th grade, I ended up with what I thought was just a bad stomach ache. And my mother said, no, we're going to go in. This is a little serious. And my appendix needed to be removed. Back then, you still had to stay in the hospital for a few days when your appendix was removed. That is the most glaring example for me, because there was a girl down the street a year later who did not go in, because when you don't have health insurance, sometimes you don't seek medical care even when things are bad. Her appendix broke, and she was out of school for over 2 months. 2 months of loss of going to school every day. I never missed school because a small sickness grew into something bigger. And that makes such a difference in the lives of children. If we talk about equity and talk about changing and ensuring that everybody has opportunity, healthcare is critical to that.
Thinking about this, I think you asked me if I disagree with you. I think not only do I agree pretty much with everything you said, I think most people probably in this room agree with everything you just said. So I'm struck by how, as a strong progressive voice, you're speaking in on a complex subject in a way that is broadly accepted by the mainstream. Pretty savvy. Pretty smart.
Well,
kudos. Not that I expected otherwise. I just think it's, of the 80 members of the Assembly, not everybody is.
Pour fire on everything and set your hospitals on fire and demand healthcare at the same time. I mean, there is a system we have to work within, and I'm very cognizant of that. Cognizant of the fact that we actually need doctors to provide the care that we need, and to do that, we have to ensure that they're paid well. One of the biggest issues I think we're going to continue to face with doctors and dentists every time we look at these bills that come through is how are we allowing them enough to pay off their student debt? I mean, we talk about student loans as an issue for every Californian going to school. But if you look at the loans that doctors and dentists are coming out of medical school with, it is just shocking. And so you can't just say, well, we're going to cut here or there and not provide for every facet of the healthcare field. So we ensure that we have enough doctors and dentists and providers in a product, and not just an ideal.
So I want to take your questions of the Assembly member and hear your thoughts. I want to give you first, Assembly member, an opportunity to talk about some of the non-healthcare stuff that you're excited about in the next legislative session. Maybe sketch for us a couple of the issue areas you want to put some time in on.
Well, I tend to be focused on the same types of things every year, and that in particular is people who work for a living. I know it's crazy, but I represent a working class environment, and I think that although California has done wonders for a lot of people, we really do have income displacement, especially among our working class. And so we're going to continue to see how we can protect, in particular, women in the workplace and low-wage workers, and provide a security for them. One of the things I think as the conversation moves that's really important to me is that we're not disregarding the importance of work for everybody. I come from the labor movement, and one of my biggest concerns is, in being in Sacramento, is it's easy to pass a welfare bill. It is. It's easy to increase welfare. Not always easy to get it signed, but it's easy to give charity. What I'm interested in is empowerment of workers and allowing people to work with dignity, to allow them, if they work 40 hours a week, to be able to afford, hopefully, a housing, putting food on the table, that they can afford to send their kid to college. And so we're going to continue to kind of chip away at those issues to ensure that big corporations, are worried as much about their janitor as they are about their stockholders.
Do you see? I guess what do you make about these wildfires? There will be fiscal implications of these wildfires. There are health implications, but are we on the cusp of really needing to be even more thoughtful about our fiscal policy related to climate change?
Well, I think not only our fiscal policy with related to climate change, that's going to cost us a lot, and we haven't even started on the damage that's going to be caused by the sea level rise, and that's going to be, I mean, we've built some beautiful things along our coast, you know, and slowly we're going to see that seeping in. So I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to continue to lead the way on climate change. Basically, everybody is really shocked by what California has done, and we've really only done the low-hanging fruit. So for us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to really lead the way, we have to talk about tailpipe emissions in cars, which nobody wants to talk about getting people out of cars and into other forms of transportation. That is the only way that we will actually slow climate change and be a leader in California. I think we're going to have to deal with the wildfire issue on multiple levels. There is, I mean, I make fun of the president raking the leaves issue, but there is forest management issues that we have to deal with. We have to deal with holding our utilities accountable. And I'm kind of in a lucky spot in San Diego. After years and years and years of fights and pushing, SDG&E is really at the forefront of having responsible reactions to fires, to the way of preventing fires, and we're going to have to make sure that all of our utilities do the same, because so many of these fires are being started by utilities that haven't kept up basically with their responsibility as well. And then I think that we're going to have to talk about where people build houses. And another thing that's not easy as we're talking about a housing crisis is building houses in places that are fire prone, flood prone, you know, that aren't in cities and high dense areas are going to continue to exacerbate the problem. So they're not comfortable conversations, but ones I think that we're going to have, or we'll never catch up with kind of the destruction that's happening.
This is a little bit in the weeds, but on the mention of housing, I heard last night that there's a initial conversation around Prop 13 and maybe splitting the residential and the commercial, that maybe there could be an initiative or a constitutional amendment that some are proposing it that would remove those protections for commercial buildings. So this building, you know, I can't remember, I don't know when it was first built, but it pays as a residential would the same amount of property tax or on that valuation based on when it was built. Is that a meaningful conversation that you're hearing advocates push for, to split the commercial from residential?
Oh, it's going to be on the 2020 ballot for sure. So I think that that's going to be a conversation. The split roll, I think, is I don't know if it's already qualified, but if it's not, it will be qualified. It's qualified, I think, 2020. It's a discussion we have to have on Prop 13. No, it's, you know, it used to be that nobody would discuss Prop 13. We now have, I think, a new set of voters who don't even know what Prop 13 is. And so it's time to have a healthy discussion that doesn't totally obliterate, especially older homeowners, but that allows us to have a rational discussion. One of my favorites that we haven't had has to do with change of ownership and what means change of ownership, right? And so I don't know if there's any Malcolm Gladwell fans, but he has a podcast and talked about like some of our beautiful golf courses in California that are owned by the country club and the individuals in the country club that has constantly changed. So since Prop 13, the entirety of people who own the golf club own the golf course have changed, and yet they still have Prop 13 protections because it has changed one person at a time, and so it's never been like a whole change from a whole group of people. Things like that just aren't fair. So when you have prime property in Los Angeles that basically is pulling in almost no taxes, you kind of wonder, well, of course we're having problems and fluctuations in taxes when we've created a system that allows those with the most money to be able to get out of the opportunity to invest in our state. Don't like how I said that one.
That's good. That's good.
That we all share. So I think there's, and that's where I'm excited if Governor Newsom, Governor-elect Newsom, I have to quit calling him Gavin now, I think, huh?
Or not.
Out of respect, the governor-elect does take on kind of these changes that are necessary in the tax system, I think it could be helpful.
Yeah. I want to turn it over to audience questions if you all have some. I know that there will be some. Whether you want to ask them or not, we'll see. But we'll start at the back here.
Hello. My name's Dave Saber. I'm a pharmacy industry consultant with Marubi Group. My question is kind of more of a long-term question with the outcome of the last round of elections, and you talked a lot about California having heavy representation by Democrats. I am a Democrat. I don't know if I needed to say that or not, but longer term, do you think that there's a prospect or a need for a rival political party, whether that's some kind of a splinter of the Republicans or some sort of a new centrist party or libertarians or something like that, so that longer term voters don't have a sense of, I just feel like a single party rule for a long period of time probably isn't the best thing, and I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, historically in the United States, we have massive realignments, every 15 years, 20 years, and I think that's happened in California and will happen again. Now, what I think is being pressed now and under Trump, especially starting in California, but other places, is do we need a third party? Or do we need some complete restructuring of parties? Because I would argue that although California is very progressive, that people who are identifying right now as Democrat, that there are a lot who are simply not Republicans, or not Trump Republicans, and that's why they're voting Democrat. I think that you have Democrats who used to be considered progressive, Nancy Pelosi, who are being pushed from the left. Right? So you're seeing these factions of power throughout both parties that kind of need somewhere to go. Now I say that, but there's not been a successful third party kind of situation in the United States, so it would take a lot of reform. Either the Republican Party in California has to change, and that's difficult for Republicans. One of my good friends is Brian Mainshine. He's waiting to see, hopefully nothing comes out of my mouth that I get in trouble for. But we're just waiting to see what happens, right? And the great candidate ran against him. But talking to Brian's not a Trump Republican, right? He just simply is not. Anyone who's worked with him, anybody who knows him knows this. He didn't vote like one. He's not one. And we know that a number of people, showed up to vote and would not vote for anyone with an R behind their name. But when I would talk to him about, why aren't you more vocal against Trump, he'd say, well, because those who still are Republicans don't want us to be. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to not speak out because of the base. And I got to say, that puts moderate Republicans at such a terrible position. And I've seen some things by Kristen Olson, by Chad Mays, some folks in the state who I think are searching for how do Republicans survive and how do they become, they're not Trump Republicans, and how do they differentiate that without losing their base? And that's the challenge, and so it'll take a while, I think, before you get that that moderation. It'll have to swing too far to the left before you get, I think, some of it back, which isn't such a bad thing. I mean, I don't think that could really swing too far to the left, but some people might say that before you get.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your comments. My name is Sarah Hesketh. I'm with the California Association of Public Hospitals that represents UC San Diego and all the county facilities around the state as well. I actually have a two-part question for you and want to build on some of your insightful comments around this healthy tension of how do we continue to invest and address some of the core issues for working class families and around poverty, and at the same time recognize the significant fluctuations in our state budget and balance those tensions of preparing for a future recession, but also continuing to make the essential investments we need to for our communities. And I'm curious on your thoughts about how you balance that. And then my second question is, if you had two major health priorities for next year that you would advise the governor on, what would they be?
All right, so I'm gonna take the second one first. I think it's going to be very generic, okay? Because I don't run healthcare bills for the most part, except for our community clinics. I actually have a district that serve overwhelmingly for community clinics. We have a community clinics person in the room, and so one of my concerns is we have had to run clarifying legislation every single year on what clinics can do to expand, or how long it takes them to expand, or how long it takes them to be able to accept Medi-Cal patients at another site. And so one of my things would be like, come on, let's start over. We know what's going on, and we know that the community clinics are at a disadvantage serving the poorest communities. They serve everybody in our communities, and we shouldn't have rules that make it tougher and tougher for them to expand. So that's one thing that I would do, is to just to bring the providers in and figure out a way that we allow for ease of expansion, if you will, to serve even more people. Isn't it great that they want to serve folks? I mean, we need this in our community. So I don't know why the department constantly fights it. That would be one. The second is simply to provide more health care to more people. And I say that because rather than come up with extreme ideological positions that we can't actually fund, or the president's never going to allow us to do, I think if we make progress on actually ensuring that people are covered, and that young people are covered, and that all of your neighbors and your grandparents are covered, and that nobody feels this kind of extreme pressure to go in a certain direction that might be untenable. So I think as long as we're expanding coverage, that would be a priority as well, if we see progress in that arena. And I think that that's important for the governor as well. And now I forgot the first question. What was the first one?
I was hoping you wouldn't look at me, because I forgot the first question as well.
It was, how do you balance the healthy tension of investment but also preparing for a future recession?
I have to say, I'm not a good person to answer that question, right? I've had the blessing of serving during good economic times, right? So it's kind of been like, all our job has been is to push this governor to spend more, right? And he's been like, well, my budget says, and we say, no, our budget says, and so we've taken it from that perspective. And I often think, as I'm looking at bills in particular, I think, gosh, if I had this job, especially as chair of appropriations during bad budget times, what would I choose? What would I first choose? Where's the excess? And I would say that there is excess that could be cut. But I think with my ideological bent is one that that prefers a dignified work over just charity. I think that that's what I would focus on. So if we can get everybody who can and is able to and wants to work a job that is self-sufficient, that we're not going in a direction of paying people not to work through some kind of universal basic income, which I highly disagree with. I think as long as we're allowing people that dignity and ensuring that the private sector, along with the public sector, is treating people with dignity and respect, that hopefully we won't continue to need so many social services.
Dale Fountain with Enact Universal Health Care for California. Well, first off, thank you for passing one of our bills, 2517, sponsored by Dr. Wood, who's probably having a terrible time right now up in Northern California. The issue was with Singlepayer. I'm one of those extreme ideological position people. Even though 59% of Californians said that they want to pay taxes for a single-payer system run by California. The question is more along the line of the Council of Healthcare Delivery Systems. It was, you passed it through your committee, and the governor inserted it into the budget. You might not have known about that, but he has 3 spots on that committee.
What committee is that? I'm sorry.
Council of Healthcare Delivery Systems. Okay, yeah. Started off as 2517, and then the public option bill came through and added on to that. What direction do you want to push him into appointing that? Do you think that, because I'm seeing right now that it seems like he doesn't even want to address that committee. So what are your thoughts about that, and what do you want to see done with that?
That's a great question, and it's not something I've thought a lot about. I think with this new governor, there's so much he's dealing with. I don't know how he comes in on healthcare and all these issues, and does he? I don't want to say scrap a lot of what we did because he's going to go the single payer issue and he's going to build towards that, or if he invests in what we've already done, that's yet to be seen. And I'm also, I want healthcare for everybody, right? I want to get to that point, and I want it to be affordable and accessible for everybody. I just also am realistic enough to know that we will not get a waiver from the federal government. I don't want to sell our constituents lies, right? We don't want to pass something or promote something just on that sounds good because they want to hear it and it not be honest because we can't actually implement it. So I'm really cognizant of that. And so I think we'll just have to wait and see. And I'd love to talk to you more because I don't know on these very particular issues within healthcare what this governor is going to do. But you know, I think a lot will be seen. Again, I tell everybody, wait till the January budget. Let's see where he's going in the January budget. I think it'll tell us a lot, the direction that if we're kind of using the tools we've given him or if he's going to scrap it for something new.
Jimmy Jackson,
Jimmy,
Biocom.
sorry, yeah.
Full disclosure, we are friends.
I couldn't see. Hi, Jimmy.
So, hi there. The ex-staffer in me is looking at my watch thinking, you have 10 minutes to bring up diaper need in a group that probably would like that issue. But my actual question, which stems from conversations we have had, when your committee will see a lot of bills that this room will be very interested in, what is the best way for the people in this room to engage with you? Is it to send a whole bunch of people marching on the Capitol? Is it to just tell you what you got wrong? Can you give them some insight on that?
I appreciate that.
Great question.
So one of my biggest frustrations with this industry and many others is this idea that if you just hire enough lobbyists to come in, that it's going to change my mind. And not to say, I mean, I don't want to hurt our lobbyists. That's a job too, and God bless them. But this is one of the problems with that. You're hiring lobbyists who don't know the issue area in depth. And I think as somebody who spends a long time reading every single bill that comes to me, trying to go as in depth as possible, even on issues that aren't my primary issue area. When I'm dealing with a lobbyist who basically just knows who they're working for and doesn't know as much as I do about the bill, that's a problem. So I like when I'm able to have real discussions early on with people who really understand the issue, the experts on the issue. They could be lobbyists as well, but usually it's the folks who work on it every single day who can come in to talk about both the political and the public policy realities. So sometimes, and I'm pretty honest about things. Like sometimes I'm like, this bill, time has come. This bill is getting out. Like this is what we're facing. How can we make this bill implemented in a way that doesn't have these tangential problems that you're bringing up? How can we fix this bill? How can we ensure that we're not causing whether it's we're trying to secure or to ensure that drug prices don't go up too quick, too often. How do we write in a way that works for the industry as well? Because we need the industry there. I think one of the things, the approaches that I bring is the one that came out of organized labor, which scares people a lot when they realize I come out of organized labor, right? Like I want to burn the building down, which I do want to always, but I control myself. But I've learned through that process that, like in organized labor, I advocated, and I still do, for workers. That's my role. That's my job. But the only way you get to advocate for workers is if there are employers. You don't advocate for workers when there's no jobs. So I understand that you can disagree with somebody on the other side, but that you still need each other. And I think a lot of times in politics, it becomes an either or rather than saying, all right, and sometimes we're not facing up to political realities. And we've had this discussion where we say, it seems bad this year. If we don't get this bill out, it's going to be worse for you next year, right? And when people decide, well, I'm just going to kill it anyway and I'll be happy with that. Well, I think we've had a couple of things in healthcare that reminded folks maybe that's not always the best way to do it. But so I like when people come in early, our experts can sit down and dive deep with me on the actual policy involved and will be honest with me about changes that could make bills become better, even if they're going to oppose it after the fact. And I understand those are the rules of the game, but it's a lot more productive than just sending 20,000 people at me or blocking my phone lines or, all of that good fun stuff.
That's great.
Hello. My name is Alejandro San Giovanni from Nextgate Solutions. We're a software vendor up in Pasadena. And I'm a West Coast salesperson. I travel to all of the metro areas in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, OC, and San Diego. And there's a recurring theme, a real issue with homelessness. And everywhere I go, huge change over the last 5 years. And I'm a young guy. And so I'd love to hear your opinion on that. I was at a health forum in Portland the mayor was there talking about homelessness. This is a much more polite audience than that was, I assure you. And so he calculated or threw out a figure that, you know, for a person to stay in taxpayer dollars, a person to stay in a shelter is $60 a night. In jail, it's $250 a night, and then in an ER is $950 a night. Love to hear your opinion on that, and then also around VA, the transition from active duty to VA health can also cause people to sort of lose hope. They don't know who they are when they show up. If they move from one county to the next, from LA County to Orange County or to San Diego, they don't know who they are. They start all over again. So love to hear your opinion on those two issues.
I think overall in homelessness, it's going to take difficult conversations, right? And it's things that, to be honest, I think we have a responsibility at the state to have, because when it becomes hyper-local, then everybody becomes a NIMBY, and everybody, wants a solution, but they don't want to be part of the solution, unfortunately. And I understand that. I mean, that's our own self-interest. At the state level, I think we have the ability to look at it in a kind of broader aspect. I've supported housing bills that circumvent as long as they're high density and in areas near transits that circumvent other rules. I'm okay with that. I think we've got to do that. I happen to live in a district that doesn't mind high density housing, so that's part of it. Most working class districts don't. That's not where we're having the problem. But we do need more growth in housing as one thing. And we have to get over this idea that everybody needs a yard and 2 acres. I'm sorry. So that's part of it. We have to build more. The second thing with homeless is we do have to separate out the different problems among our homeless population. So we have those people who it's a housing crisis. The minimum wage isn't paying enough. They're the working poor that are becoming homeless. I think that's an easy solution. I continue to work on problems to get wages up, to provide more housing, to ensure that people don't lose their house in the first place. Not an easy solution, but one we can at least still figure out before it gets too desperate. The hard one is with mental health issues and drug addictions. I think, and this is not universally popular, I passed through a number of bills that people were kind of shocked at this year that allowed people to intervene with homeless who can't take care of themselves. And so I think after years, this is my perspective. I'm not an expert on the subject, so anyone can tell me I'm wrong. But what we seem to have had in California is when Ronald Reagan came in as governor and wanted to shut down hospitals, state hospitals and institutions, there was kind of an unholy alliance with folks who want to protect and are really honest about wanting to protect people who want to take care of themselves and with a little help can take care of themselves but shouldn't be hospitalized, right? So we had the Lanterman Act and we had kind of this swing where Reagan was allowed to do what he did, and at the same time, advocates were like, this is great, people should have self-determination, they should have the right to choose whether or not they're in an institution. I think it swung too far. I see people every day that I know need help, whether they know it or not, and I believe we have a moral responsibility to build state institutions to house them and get them help. Now, I don't want everybody in an institution. I don't want to be permanent. And there are situations where people under supervision can get better. We want that. But I think that because we have eliminated here in San Diego, we have like no county hospital and we have not a lot of psych beds and they keep getting smaller and smaller, and we've eliminated the state hospital expansion. In fact, we're trying to get people out of state hospitals, and I think that that's a problem. So I think we have to have that discussion, and it's uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable saying it, right? And I know what I feel on this, and I'm uncomfortable saying it, so I know that it's a tough discussion to have, but it's a growing issue. Also, drugs. And I'm not suggesting we lock people up for drugs, but by not locking people up now, we have I think more drug use that we're seeing it run a little bit more rampant. And with opioid problems, we've got to figure that out as well. So I think we need recovery centers for people, places where people can go get better and can become self-sufficient for those who, people with addictions can take care of themselves. They have to get rid of the addiction though. And so I think all of those types of resources need to be increased.
It seems like you have this sort of kind of maybe little bit of a traditional thread in your politics where it's not conservative, but it's focused on the work ethic of your mother, and it's making sure that communities are safe while we take care of people who need help, but that streets are safe. Would you characterize your politics as progressive, but with a traditional thread?
I am a crazy liberal.
Yeah.
I have to get reelected. Yes. No, I actually think I represent my district really well. So I have a large immigrant population who believe in hard work, who believe that like government can and should do good, that government could be a force for good. And sometimes all people need, not for government to get out of the way, but just to help them a little to be able to empower themselves. So I absolutely do think I have a different view. I think that I think that our overdependence, quite frankly, on social services has hurt our communities in a way that it alleviates people's guilt. It's okay. They have food stamps. They'll be able to eat. Well, that's not okay. When we live in a society where major corporations are basically allowing taxpayers to subsidize their wages through social service programs, that's not okay. It makes me mad because it hurts the dignity of individuals who work hard, but it should make all of us mad because we're paying as corporations get wealthier. That's where it's not, I guess, it's more populist in a way, but I really do believe that most people want to do well for themselves. And I am lucky enough to live in a community too that, and having walked precincts in every community in California now, I'll say it's a little different than like the Inland Empire or the Valley because we still have people who are poor but have a lot of hope, if that makes sense. They still dream that things are going to be better for their child. There are other parts of California where that poverty has turned into hopelessness. And that worries me. And I think we've got to inject some hope in that, and that comes by way of a good job, a quality education, clean air, access to health care, and I think that's our responsibility because I know at the end of the day, after all of this fear and horribleness that is happening because of the Trump agenda in my district, when that fear goes away, we'll go back to being a very hopeful community that believes wholeheartedly that their kids are going to do better than they did, that they came to this country to work hard and allow their kids an opportunity, and they're going to have that. But we got to work on the rest of the state and places like that.
You know, I am tremendously honored that you came to join us, and I am even more tremendously honored having spent the last hour listening to you. There's an old line about legislatures that there are 90% of people don't think, 9% of the people think they're thinking, and only 1% of the people are thinking, and those are the ones you want to talk to. You're clearly in that 1%. We have about 55,000 people on our email list here in California. We host 3 of these events. You are welcome anytime, and you are welcome to use our email list in terms of speaking to the community anytime you'd like. A real pleasure having you here. Let's give her another round of applause.
Thank you.